Now, when I left off in the last demonstration, I had used the Query Designer to create a new data set. And that will have generated a query and had a parameter. Now, just remember that that query is not complete, but it's good enough to design the report. I can run the query and I can see a sample of records. Unfortunately, in this tool, I can't get a count of records, so I don't know how many records are coming back. What I can tell you based on my experience is that there are many thousands of records coming back because these are order details. We're going to come back and deal with that momentarily. I'll click OK. There's the actual query in T-SQL. These are the fields or columns that are returned. These are the joins based on the relationships within the database. And then this is the where clause or the filter. And you can see that this is the name of a parameter because I chose the parameter checkbox rather than hard coding that as the calendar year 2016. The designer has created a parameter for me. I'll click OK. Note that a report parameter was created that allows the user to enter a value. We'll use that momentarily. Now I want to add fields to my report. At this point, I ask myself, what kind of report am I creating? This is a table report. So I'm going to insert a table. You can see that that changes the mouse pointer. I'm going to add that to the report here. If I just drag fields into the table, then it's going to return all of those rows that we talked about earlier. I want to group this data. So I am going to create row groups by dragging and dropping above the details group, then the city, between state and details, then the customer, between city and details. And you can see that that also adds row group headers in my table. Now, if I were to drag and drop the quantity into this cell, notice that that's to the right of this little double broken line. This tells me that these are my group headers, these are my details, and the total excluding tax to this cell. And I run the report. We do get order details. You can see that I have lots of individual detail rows underneath my customer name. Let's move to another page so you can see an actual customer name that's not unknown. You can see that that customer is in this city in this state. But how many records am I actually returning? The reporting service hasn't even rendered out all of the pages yet because it doesn't know. But if I go to the last page, you can see that that report would be 680 pages long. Why so long? Because we're not actually grouping the details. If I go back to design and go down to the details group, you'll see that the details group is a placeholder for all of my detail records. So I need to group the details. So I use the little down arrow to the right of the details group placeholder and choose group properties. That opens the group properties where I can add a group expression. I'll click Add and say Group on Customer, because that's the lowest level group in the hierarchy, and click OK. Now, if I were to do this ahead of time, before I had added these two fields, when I add the field, you would see that it actually adds the sum function. Okay, the same thing would happen if I were to select the field in this way. It would add the sum function because since we're grouped at the customer level, the values here must be aggregated because the lowest level of detail is now going to be customer. Let's go ahead and run the report again. And now you can see that the lowest level of detail that we see is the customer, and we see larger numbers for the quantity and the total excluding tax. We have a little bit of cleanup to do. I'm going to go back to design, and first thing I'll do is just give my header a back color that makes it stand out a little bit. So I'll just click on the table and click on the row selector. That's this little gray area to the left. In the border group, I'll drop down the fill bucket and I'll select a color that appeals to me. The sum of the quantity is always going to return a whole number. So I'll select that cell, drop this list down, and choose number, and I'll reduce the decimal positions to the right until this turns gray. You can see there's already a 1,000 separator, so that's correct. I'll choose this cell, and I know that this is a currency value, and that I know that in my database I'm using US dollars. So I'm just going to click on the currency symbol that sets that to currency, and I'll run that report. I have just a little bit of cleanup work to do. You can see that I have an extra column right here. We don't have a report title. Let's go ahead and go back to design view, and I'll add a report title. Let's call this orders by customer for year. And I'll right click on the column header. Again, I just wanted to point out that to be able to manipulate rows and columns in the table, you click once in the table that shows the row and column handles. Then I can right click on this column header and say delete columns. That's good enough for now. Go ahead and just resize that a little bit. Make sure we can see the bottom of the Y there. And run the report. So that's good enough. You can see that I can change the parameter. I'm going to press the Enter key, which is the same thing as clicking the View Report button. Notice that took a couple of seconds for this query to run. And the last thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to save the report. This is on my report server. We'll go ahead and give it the same name as before, orders by customer for year. All right, I'd like to wrap up this demonstration where we are, but I just want to point out a couple of things. We know that we have lots of order details that we're summarizing within the report. We're rolling up to the customer, but there's lots of other detail records out there that are coming back from our query. So we have a report that we can run. It returns accurate values and it's useful, but I want you to keep that data detail issue in mind when we get into the next demonstration.